For over 30 years, the West End office of accountants Kingston Smith has been the established specialist firm for the independent advertising, marketing and entertainment sectors. Ever since Bob Willott founded Willott Kingston Smith, the firm has also compiled the most thorough annual financial survey of the sector, defining the benchmarks by which firms are measured. 4 years since his third retirement, Bob has published a new book, Between the Balance Sheets. Recently, Bob met with Paprika MD Nick Tomlinson to discuss some of his insights into an industry he understands so well, including those covered in the book.
Bob, thank you very much for coming today to talk about your new book that you recently published, Between the Balance Sheets, which is a compendium of the articles you've wrote in the Fintellect series, which you've then brought up to date with some commentary. I was a great fan of Fintellect, very much look forward to it, and miss it now. So when it was announced that there was going to be a revisiting, it was very interesting. I've always associated you with the Willott Kingston Smith practice, which I first came across, I think, in the early 90s. And it wasn't actually till I read your book that I realised that your career started much earlier, initially as, I think, the first ever editor of Accountancy Age, and then becoming technical director of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. So I wonder, how did this come about? Was this it's a very interesting career path. How did it come about, and was it all part of a plan?
Well, the short answer is it was all accidental from the day I first became an article clerk at the age of 16. The decision to become an accountant arose because I had lunch with a cousin who had just signed articles, and I said to my father, David just signed articles, I wonder whether it's something I ought to think about. My father said, well, if you're going to do it, we ought to go and respond to some ads, which we did. So I went to, so I got offered articles. I went to tell my headmaster that I got articles in the middle of the sixth form, this was, and he said, well, if you're going to become an accountant, the sooner you go, the sooner you qualify, which was the worst possible advice. I had thought originally I was going to perhaps go to university and perhaps teach maths or something silly. So that was the first accident, really, and I became an accountant by accident. I then became a partner eventually, and there was an advertisement in the Observer for the editor for a weekly financial news magazine. I replied thinking, there's no way I want to do that. I'm a partner in a firm of accountants, but they might want a column on accountancy. Come in, they said. So I went in, and before I knew where we were, they had a dummy of Accountancy Age. They hadn't got an editor, and it was clear they were trying to get me not to become editor because they weren't sure about me, but perhaps might become editor. So over about a week and a half, they pressed me coming backwards and forwards, and I was a young partner and didn't really think I should be leaving the firm. So anyway, in the end, cut a long story short, I decided I'd take the risk. My wife was prepared to support it, and I went off to launch Accountancy Age, and then became a director of Haymarket. So that was total accident, nothing that was planned. And then, sadly, my wife was unwell, and I decided that, therefore, working long hours and producing magazines was perhaps not compatible. So the opportunity came up to go to the Institute. So I did that, became technical director. And it just went on like that. Nothing was ever planned, ever planned. And I always used to encourage young trainee accountants who always seem to have a perfect plan for their career. Don't have a too perfect plan. See what opportunities may come up. You may be surprised how your life will go and how exciting it could become. So the short answer is total accident.
How did you come to be involved as almost a specialist in advertising and marketing services? Was that before, presumably, Willott Kingston Smith was always aimed at that sector, I think. So was that something that happened before, or?
It was before that, yes. You must remember everything that's happened in my career is an accident. So don't think that was incredibly planned. It wasn't at all. When exactly this happened, I think it was when I left the Institute and joined what was then Spicer and Pegler as a partner. At that point in time, I had been, 5 years or more away from publishing. I had a phone call one day from a former board colleague of mine at Haymarket, a chap called Paul Buckley, who's sadly not with us anymore, saying, I've got these mates who want to set up an agency, and I thought you might be able to help them. And I said, well, I'd be very happy to, bearing in mind I was new to Spices, only been there a few weeks. And he said, I'll get them to call you, and they did. And it turned out to be John Bartle, John Hegarty, and Nigel Bogle, who very kindly turned up with a bottle of wine one evening to discuss how they might perhaps negotiate a management buyout from TBWA, as it was those days. I think that's all public knowledge, I think. And I cut a long story short again, they concluded that actually, or we concluded with them, that they could actually leave TBWA without outside backing, which they did, which was an unusual situation, but again, the world was full of unusual situations. And so BBH became my first client in the advertising industry, to whom I will always be grateful, and I hope they know that. And we set up Willott Kingston Smith, and that was a total niche operation. And to my absolute delight, it seemed to work. Clients came, and we were able to build quite a sizable presence in the West End, and so it went on. So yeah, I think specialising does work, as long as you've got the expertise to do it, and in an industry where I think probably they felt there wasn't anybody particularly who they could go to with that knowledge.
And Fintellect, which I think you were producing all the way through that time, that kind of moved into the marketing services specialisation as well?
It's the other way around, I think, because at the time I left Touche Ross, I had already developed for them, and Spices before them, an annual survey of financial performance of marketing service companies.
They're still going, the Kingston Smith.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
But the Spices one, which was the original one, they carried it on a little while within Touche Ross. But when I left Touche Ross, I discussed with Campaign magazine that we might do something similar. Obviously, wouldn't want to breach any restrictions, and they thought, yeah, okay. So we started producing something which was published in Campaign, and that was the survey that's still there, was the More Kingston Smith survey. And I think I'm right in saying that eventually Touche Ross dropped theirs. I don't think they do one now. So Fintellect was founded in that interregnum between the time I left Touche Ross and the year or so later that I set up Willott Kingston Smith as the vehicle in which we would do two things. One, we would produce a survey, and the other was we would advise, or I had been asked to advise various companies in that interregnum, and it therefore became the vehicle that provided advice and produced published material, and still does, but at my age now it does little.
And how does that lead into the book, into Between the Balance Sheets?
This has really happened in the days when, in the Willott Kingston Smith era. I think about the time, latterly probably, we were beginning to produce special reports, or maybe it was after. I think maybe it was after I'd retired properly. I decided to start the marketing services newsletter, which I think, as the book tells, was prompted by the announcement that Liga Stelani had been sold for many millions of pounds to Envoy Communications Group, which I was slightly intrigued by, because on the survey we'd been producing, Liga Stelani hadn't been a particularly profitable company, and I think I'm being polite in saying that. So Campaign wanted to know whether this was, what I thought about as profitability. Was this, a really profitable agency, and what did I think? And I looked it up, and of course, as I think I knew, it wasn't profitable. But also, Envoy, who were going to buy it, had not at that point in time, as it honestly disclosed to its shareholders, hadn't raised the money to buy it. So here we had a company that announced it was being sold, but hadn't yet got a buyer who got the money in place, which I thought was rather unusual. So and I felt, this sort of information ought to be in the public domain. It's not the sort of thing that people, mistakes that people should make. So I decided to launch Marketing Services Financial Intelligence as a newsletter. And from that, we then would focus on various issues, and from time to time, if it was important enough, we'd do a special report. So we produced umpteen special reports. And when retirement proper came and I closed the newsletter, I thought it'd be quite helpful to bring together those reports and the examples that came out of it as one single volume. So between the balance sheets is what it's called.
I'm sure there's an element to which a story where everything goes swimmingly well is not as interesting or newsworthy as a disaster. But between the balance sheets has, well, not all disasters, but when you count the number of write-offs of goodwill and the things that haven't turned out, it seems that quite often valuations people get valuations wrong. So is it very difficult, or are the people doing it not very good at it?
Well, just to preface my reply to that, I think you're absolutely right. The book focuses on issues and matters that seemed to me to be newsworthy at the time. There are lots of examples of successful agencies that, but it wasn't what we were particularly focusing on. We wanted to try to identify issues that people could learn from. So yes, it is about things that went wrong. It doesn't mean nothing ever went right. As to whether the industry therefore lacks some sort of skill base to manage better, again, that would be unfair. But I think that most creative businesses, and probably most entrepreneurial businesses, start off with somebody with particular flair that wants to build something that's going to be successful, however that's measured. They are keen to do whatever it is their skill. That's what gets the business. And then if it goes well, a lot of people feel they want to be bigger. So they think, well, maybe we'll buy businesses or whatever we'll do. So I think it's a human instinct to get bigger and greater if the opportunity arises. And of course, if that is what drives people, some sadly will be too ambitious for their own skill set or their own financial capital base, and things go wrong. If you're a small business, and a talented business run by somebody who's got pretty good acumen and so forth, you can probably manage, without a disaster. But typically, the skill set required for, a small business may not be adequate when you want to start buying companies, or you haven't learned the lesson of keeping enough capital to cope with ups and downs in the industry. I mean, it's a very simple thing, but if you're trading nicely and growing regularly, and most of what you're making you're taking out as remuneration, if you suddenly have a downturn, you haven't got any spare cash waiting to soak that up and keep you going. And indeed, if you're in a creative business, you might find it quite hard as a finance director to persuade the entrepreneurs, look, guys, you could, if this goes wrong, you could be better off if you had £1 million still in the bank rather than giving it all away to yourselves.
When I first became involved in the industry in the 70s, stock market listings were very much in vogue. So the Michael Peters and the Fitch, and they went through that whole process. And then there was the ascendancy of the big three, as it was, the IPG, the Omnicom, and WPP, which was really, I think, WPP set the stage for that, and Martin Sorrell and with what he's done from this time at Saatchi's. And that seemed to be the pattern, that as an entrepreneur you could build a business, sell it to one of the big groups who were so acquisitive, stay there for the earn-out, get rid of all the non-competes, and then start something else.
Yeah, I think that is true, and I think it is important that anybody who's building a business tends to want to be able to enjoy the value that they've created. So if your business is potentially saleable for £10 million, you're going to start saying to yourselves, well, guys, how actually do we get the benefit of that? If we pay ourselves too much or pay out lots of dividends, then the people like Willott will complain that we're weakening the company, so we have to be careful about that. So it isn't always that straightforward, and you're quite right. The entrepreneurs involved in this business are often just anxious to be able to get their hands on some of the value, and rightly say, well, actually, we've created it. Why can't we have it? But it's not as straightforward as that. And, there are ways to do it, but they're not that easy. The easiest way is either to sell it to your WPPs of this world, or more recently, perhaps to private equity investors.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be one of the biggest changes in the last, I suppose, 5 to 10 years, is that the big 4 or 5, as they are now, have become much less acquisitive, and private equity is now very much to the fore. Is private equity the right source of finance for marketing services businesses?
Yes, I ask it not because I'm anti-private equity per se, but whether its model is ideally suited to a people business that really depends on maintaining the contributions of creative people who will come and go and are more likely to stay if they feel that if their name's not over the door, that their clients realise that they are part owners of the business. So if I've been working for 5 years in an agency, I like to think if I'm one of the leading talents that I can feel it's partly mine. And private equity, sadly, doesn't really provide that solution, although you might imagine it does. Because what happens with private equity is their interest in life is to buy something and sell it. They're market traders. I don't mean it unkindly, but basically they make their livings by buying a business and being able to sell it for more, normally within 5 years for various technical reasons. And I don't think it offers enough interest to young creative people to stay, because I think they do feel they want to be seen as part of the business.
When the big networks were buying, well, one felt that they actually did understand the business, so they they had an understanding of what was likely to happen and how the market was trying to change and how it was structured. Do you feel with the prominence of private equity now, these are companies which arguably don't understand the services, the market, they have a different short-term view, that is to the detriment of the whole process of businesses growing and emerging and evolving?
I suppose the short answer would be yes. I think that private equity, openly acknowledges it's in there to trade in companies. It will say, and with justification, we do try to, in quotes, improve the company's performance and its basic value while we own it. We aren't. They would defend anybody accused of actually sort of asset stripping and just exploiting it for their own good. On the other hand, if you go down to a marketplace and want to buy something, you're trading in potatoes, whatever it is, and they are trading in companies, and their sole purpose is to make profit out of it for their investors. And if that means they can make that company a lot better, and that's the way they increase value, then that's good. But sometimes they can be much more cynical. They can strip out various things. They can do various things and sell it at a nice profit. And then if you sort of 5 years later look and say, well, what was left of what they sold? Has it gone? Has it achieved anything? It's almost certainly sold into another group or to another private equity. And that may be all right, it may not. But once you're part of a big group, you can be a successful business, nothing wrong with that. But it lacks the culture and character of a people business where a partnership of creative talent work together with their clients to make successful advertising or direct marketing, whatever. I'm happy for there to be those big players, but I am eager for those who are young and building businesses to still feel they can build them if they want to for the long term. And certainly that we don't want a situation where basically they're just bought and sold as to the highest bidder all the time.
Thank you for watching. To order a copy of Between the Balance Sheets with a special 10% discount, please click the link in our newsletter to download your order form. Don't miss the second part of our interview, where Bob and Nick discuss some notable names covered in Between the Balance Sheets, and Bob's biggest regret after a career working with some of the most notable entrepreneurs in the marketing industry.